Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Northwest University, welcome to this webinar focusing on the world of social work. And you are very fortunate because today we'll hear about all the research focus areas when it comes to social work at the Northwest University. We have several webinars available here, and you're more than welcome to engage with them. You are welcome to post a question in the YouTube comments section, and we'll see it. And after their introductions and after we hear a little bit more about what they do, we'll give them the opportunity to address those questions if there are any. We're focusing on 2 degrees, but more so on the master's degree in social work. And we'll also give you information about the master's degree in social work and a little bit of information about the PhD, should you be interested in that higher qualification. Right, now let's start off with the introductions, and we're going to start with the director within this field, the leader as it were, Professor Rita Bloem. And Rita, thank you so much for being here. Tell us a little bit more about your world and give us a little bit of background on the world of social work at the Northwest University.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm Rita Bloem and I'm the research director for Compres, and Compres is then actually the research home for social work at the Northwest University over 3 campuses. That is Potchefstroom campus, Vaal campus, as well as Mahikeng campus. And then we also do have a research platform in the Western Cape. Not a lot of people do know that, in Wellington, and for research focusing on children, youth and family studies. So often, so many times we have extreme challenges in social work and we do not have all the answers, especially if we're practitioners and we're battling to get to a point where we feel that we have impact, we make a difference in the lives of people. And so often we don't have the skills to, or we don't feel equipped to address these challenges. And today I hope that we will give you some guidance in how to sometimes get a skill set. And that is with postgraduate studies. And we're going to focus on the master's, the academic master's degree in social work. It is an open degree for registered social workers. There's no structured component to this degree. You enroll for a master's degree, and then you do your research in a specific field, and there will be some researchers explaining to you the focus areas in Compres or in social work. And it's not only the only focus areas we have, but that is more prominent focus areas this afternoon. And hopefully you be intrigued by what we can offer you, especially in aiming to understand the world we live in better. Thank you very much. And I think we can start off by asking some of our researchers, and there's a whole team of them this afternoon, to explain a little bit of what they do and how they get to specific answers for specific problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rita, and we'll come back to you a little bit later on for more on the world of higher degrees and research in social work. But as Rita has mentioned, it's time for us to hear from the experts. And I know that the world of social work is a broad field and there are many issues to deal with, so we can delve into these specific focus areas. First, we're going to ask Dr. Peter Bosov to expand a little bit on the research focus he engages in. Peter, welcome. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity as well. My name is Peter Bosov, and I'm a senior lecturer in the subject group social work at the Northwest University and Potchefstroom campus. My research focus area is trauma in emergency services, particularly in the military, focusing on the South African Police Service, medical emergency services, referring to ambulance personnel and paramedics employed by ER24, our government emergency services and Netcare 911, and also the fire departments. We are living in one of the countries in the world where crime and other emergency situations has reached epidemic proportions. And in comparison to other countries, the South African emergency services are therefore subjected to a significant amount of traumatic occurrences, such as violent crime, traffic collisions, burn injuries, also other natural and human disasters, which might cause mental suffering and illness to those emergency services that are confronted with these incidents on a daily basis. And trauma is linked to major mental health and behavioral issues, such as post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, even substance abuse, suicide, and in extreme situations, death. And exposure to traumatic incidents most commonly result in post-traumatic stress disorder. It encompasses distinct psychological and physiological symptoms that may occur as a result of being exposed to or witnessing an event involving real or threatened death, or significant injury to oneself or to another person. And the aim is to prevent post-traumatic stress disorder and its comorbidities by intervening as soon as possible after emergency personnel are exposed to traumatic events. Emergency services, despite the nature of the work and the traumatic challenges it entails, have received very little attention in South Africa during recent years. And this despite the fact that they are vital to our communities. And therefore, there is no doubt in my mind that they are entitled to the best possible trauma intervention support. Now, in 2011, I enrolled for my PhD, during which I focused on trauma in the South African Police Service. And this was motivated by my past experience with trauma intervention in the police, but also my passion for trauma-informed treatment or care. And during this time in the police, I identified some inadequacies regarding overall trauma management because I was personally involved with trauma intervention. And then I decided to develop a psychosocial trauma intervention program that is sensitive and attentive to the needs of police officials who have been exposed to traumatic situations. And what distinguishes this program from other trauma intervention programs is that it does not only focus on psychological factors, but also include behavioral and social elements, giving a comprehensive guideline, particularly to social workers within the field of trauma. Now, my PhD led to the creation of a trauma project, and the title of my project is Post-Traumatic Stress in the Setting of Emergency Services Personnel in South Africa. And the project used a randomized controlled trial to see if the psychosocial trauma intervention program for post-traumatic stress can be transferred to emergency services professionals throughout South Africa, and not only the police. The motivation for the above is that the program that was developed as part of my PhD was implemented and tested amongst police in the Northwest province. And unfortunately, this is only one section of emergency services in South Africa. Therefore, it cannot be generalized. And although preliminary findings indicated that the program was effective in empowering police officials to better deal with distress and preventing the development of post-traumatic stress disorder, it is limited to a single study only. And therefore, larger samples of selected clients with post-traumatic stress are needed to determine the program's effectiveness and the extent to which the program can be generalized to medical emergency services personnel. The project was therefore developed to determine the efficiency as well as the transportability of the program's outcomes from the previous research trial amongst police officials to other emergency services personnel in South Africa. And in order for me to accomplish this goal, 10 master's students 2 students over a period of 5 years have to be recruited to investigate the efficiency of the program within emergency services in several South African provinces. In 2020, the project started using a phased-in strategy, and the project currently has 1 PhD student and 2 master's students enrolled. The PhD student, just to give you a little bit of background, is evaluating the psychosocial trauma intervention program amongst ER24 paramedics in the Northwest province, whilst 1 MA student, the master student, focus on ER24 paramedics experiences of trauma and trauma intervention programs, and the other master student is conducting a randomized control trial amongst ER24 paramedics in Gauteng. In 22, the project will have capacity for 1 more PhD and 1 master student as part of a full master's in social work to expand the randomized control experiment to other provinces in South Africa, but also other departments of the military, the medical emergency services, as well as the fire department. And the number of students recruited for the project will be gradually supplemented with 2 master students per year over a 5-year period. Thank you.
Wow, Peter, that's fascinating. It's I like the extent of the program as well as the longevity that you have in it. You know, when you spoke about emergency personnel and your focus on their world, I immediately thought that in South Africa they are really experiencing a double whammy. It's a trauma and the difficulties of the work itself, but then we so often hear of an ambulance being hijacked somewhere and the paramedics being robbed. So it really is a tremendous challenge. Tell me a little bit about how you go about in data collection, because obviously it's not just one-on-one interviews and so on. I assume there's a multitude of data collection methods that your students employ, perhaps a bit of mixed method and triangulation and so on?
Oh, yes, definitely. Well, just first of all, to comment on what you said about the exposure to violence of paramedics in South Africa, especially one of my students, the second master student, is specifically focusing on that, because that's the reality. That is the reality in South Africa, and that is what they are more and more confronted with. Yes, most definitely. Just to answer your second question, obviously, yes. We use a quantitative method, qualitative methods as well. Yes, and as well as a mixed method approach with regards to our. If you look at the randomized control trial, for example, you see is that we go out to other departments, other emergency services personnel, and try and test this program to see whether it is also applicable, whether it is effective, and whether it can be generalized, you know, to other emergency services. And most of these are done within a group setting. So it's basically a group work intervention, which is very much relevant to the social work profession as well. So it's not only one-on-one, face-to-face contact sessions, but it is group sessions as well, in which we involve these paramedics, for example, paramedics or other emergency services personnel.
Thank you so much, Peter. Really appreciate it, and good luck with all the work that you do. I think all the experts in social work are focusing on areas that you feel, listen, there should really be a major contribution made. And thank you for the contribution that you make.
Absolutely.
All right, now we move on to Professor Mariette van der Merwe. Mariette, thank you for being with us. We look forward to hear about the research you engage in. Tell us more.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks. It's a privilege to be able to talk to you all about something that is very close to my heart, and that is research in the fields of trauma. there's a number of things connected with this. The main focus is trauma. Most of my students do their research in resource-poor communities, so that's an added variable. Connected to that, might sound strange or not, is a well-being perspective, and that is linked to post-traumatic growth as well. So it's a mix of variables, but all covered with a trauma umbrella. Then connected to that also, I'm especially interested in the trauma of people on the move. I currently have an ongoing study on migrants and the trauma that they experience in all the phases when they move to a new country during the journey, which is sometimes really, really traumatic, and then also when they arrive in the new country. Connected to that, there's a very vulnerable group, which is very often also a neglected population, and that students or learners, high school learners who come from other provinces to access good schools, and then they end up in resource-poor communities, sometimes in very difficult situations where they can also be exposed to trauma, hunger, poverty, all of those aspects. For that particular project, I have space for 2 master's students next year in the Western Cape. I am situated in the Western Cape, but we also work with students right all over the country. But that particular project would be for 2 students in the Western Cape. Then I also have studies going on at the moment on gun violence, the perspectives of the youth on gun violence, on stabbing-related violence, which is a huge problem. If you just read the newspapers, you will see many, many instances of stabbing-related violence. And then also I have a study on school violence, which is ongoing, and also then the one on the migrant trauma. Yeah, so those are broadly the areas. I encourage my master's students to choose their focus on a specific trauma so that they can carry it on, ideally, to a PhD. So they would explore gun violence and understand the phenomenon of gun violence as part of the master's studies. And then when they move on to a PhD, they would look at developing a model or an intervention to address this problem in practice. In terms of the research methodology, I commonly use multi-phased research, which can include a quantitative component. The qualitative component, I encourage the students to use visual data collection strategies, such as body maps, social networks. Yeah, there's a variety of that. It's kind of arts-based data collection strategies, also stories, can do role plays. There's a whole variety of that. And what I have found is that typically would lead to very, very rich and deep data. And it would also help people with limited literacy, people who find it difficult to verbalize. It would help them to expand on these situations. Just as an example, we did a really good study a few years ago where the student used the tattoos and scars on the bodies of young boys in conflict with the law. They were actually detained in youth centers. And just talking about their scars and their tattoos, as it was indicated on the body maps, opened a whole new world for a very hard to reach population. They commonly find it very difficult to talk about their experiences. So that is kind of our tool, the visual data collection strategies, to open up the discussions, to make them feel comfortable, and then to offer them a variety of tools like crayons, clay even, to help them to talk about the research phenomenon that we are interested in. So that is broadly speaking. I would also be able to accommodate one more master's student next year. So it would be a total of 3 that I can accommodate within this focus area.
Thank you so much, Mariette. There is a richness in your work. I think that leads to a real in-depth understanding of the trauma that you study. Right at the beginning, you mentioned the word well-being. And immediately I thought, in my own situation, I think I'm fortunate that well-being in an organizational context is at the one end of the scale, but well-being in the trauma situations that you explore is a different thing. Tell me a little bit more about how you see well-being. How would you define it? How do you approach the idea of well-being?
That is a very rich topic. I'm thinking of a victim of severe trauma who wrote a book about her experiences, and she said that obviously she would never ever choose to have that experience, but she would choose to be the person that she is today. Now, there's something in that. It means that she could appreciate the growth out of the trauma, and that is very difficult to achieve, but many of the people that we include in our research and people that I've worked with in practice as well would indicate that they can look back and they can see the growth. And that brings us to the link then between well-being and post-traumatic growth. I think post-traumatic growth is something that is quite underexplored, and that I think I encourage my student to include at least one question on post-traumatic growth in their interview questions or whatever data collection strategy they use. So the well-being would then, it would mean to look at yourself, to be aware of what happened to you, to really be able to verbalize your experience. We often talk about shifting the memories from the primitive part of the brain where it is situated after trauma, to shift those memories to a part of the brain where it is more accessible, where you can then work with it more cognitively. And once you can start doing that, you can also then look at the kind of the sparkling moments, if I can put it like that. And in a sense, then it is a move away from just the problem-saturated story to also the story of growth and the story of coping.
Mariette, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Fascinating work, and good luck with the studies you are engaged in. Next up, we're going to talk to Professor Carlien van Wyk. Carlien, we look forward to what you have to say. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you again for this opportunity as well. Yes, I'm Carlien van Wyk. I'm also involved at the Center for Child, Youth and Family Studies in Wellington, and my specific research focus area is on facilitating children's participation in the context of child protection in South Africa. So I'll first say something a bit more about children's participation and then a bit more of the specific context. That's actually a new context to some extent that I want to start a new project in. But let's start with the children's participation. I think if we look at South African legislation, there's a commitment to ensure that children's human rights are promoted and developed. We know that participation is an ongoing process where children have the opportunity to express their meaning, to be involved in decision making at different levels in matters that specifically concern them. But it also entails showing respect for children's views on matters affecting their lives, taking into consideration the child's age, developmental phase, and maturity, as it is mentioned in the Children's Act. So my focus is guided specifically by a children's right perspective, although other social work theories are also just as important, something like the strength-based perspective, ecological systems approach, as we know that each child is part of a bigger system where the different systems do interact with one another, but also influence one another. So the ultimate goal of research in children's participation for me is to encourage and also to promote children's participation in the context of social work in South Africa. I think a lot of times we can say, yes, but I do ask children their opinion. I try to hear how children feel about things. But if we really start talking to children, we realize that there's a lot of things that we need to put into place in order to create this space or this enabling environment where children can really participate. So the specific context that I'm then interested in is in child protection, where we render services to the most vulnerable children in our country. If we think about children in child and youth care centers, children in foster care, I mean, that's just some few examples. And maybe I can mention one of my PhDs that completed her study, and just to give you an idea what she did, because I think what I really want to do is to make this practical, to give social workers, almost to empower social workers to be able to facilitate children's participation. Because I really believe that each child do have it in him or herself to participate, but we need to create the space where children can do it. So we are only the facilitators in this whole process. So the study that I was referring to was one that what a doctoral student did. It's a completed study, and it was on the facilitation of children's participation within multidisciplinary meetings in a child and youth care center, a social work, specific a social work intervention. So this is a meeting in a child and youth care center where big decisions are being made about children's lives. And I can just, if I talk about this study, I can still remember the quotes of children, the quotes of social workers and child and youth care workers involved with children, saying that they are inviting children in almost into this adult space, and then expect children to sometimes not even be able to see the other adults if they're sitting on a table and sitting on a small chair. But then we do want children to participate. We want them to feel comfortable. So, and in this study, it was very clear, and different guidelines were developed on how we can make it possible for children to be part of this meeting and to participate and to make their voices heard. I've got another PhD student at the moment that's working on a community-based palliative pediatric care model to facilitate children's participation. So this is children that's also vulnerable, but in a different context. But how we can facilitate even children that is so vulnerable, but to be part of a process, to have a voice, to be able to be part of decisions being made about their lives. So I think if I talk about children's participation in general, for me, I want to create the opportunity for children to make their voices heard. I think that's the first thing. And we can only do that if we create an enabling environment for children where they can participate freely and meaningfully as well. And then we are giving children agency. Agency referring to the capacity for children to act independently and to make their own free choices and to be part of all these decisions that we as adults can make so easily for them in their lives. So although I had several students working in children's participation, the way forward is a new project that's still in its baby shoes, where I want to invite students to become part of it, PhD or master students. And in this bigger picture, I see there's a bigger puzzle that we want to build. And this is really to develop a toolbox or an intervention that can assist social workers facilitating children's participation. Because if we do not empower the social workers to be able to facilitate children's participation, how will children get the opportunity to do that? So it's still as I've said, in the baby shoes, but it's a qualitative study where I really want to encourage students to start thinking creatively, where we can use visual data collection methods, something like photo voice, where we can allow children to take photos, to bring that, to use it for data collection. And in the end, I believe that we will be able to make a difference in children's lives through doing this. So yes, for next year, I do have, I can still take in a master's and a PhD student. And yes, I would like to invite students to apply and then to be part of this exciting project. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carleen. Wow, another area where a deep impact is reached. I'm curious about the ethical clearance involved, because I know there must be rigorous ethical clearance processes involved when working with children or studies related to children. How does the Faculty of Health Sciences assist postgraduate students in the ethical clearance process?
Yes, no, we really receive wonderful assistance from the Health Research Ethics Committee. I think sometimes we are scared to do research with children because of the fact that we know that there are a lot of ethical issues that need to be sorted. And I think what I've learned throughout the, especially the last few years, is that yes, we can do research with children, that we can be ethical, that we can include children, but that there are certain ways of doing it. I think the consultation that the HREC provides us with to sit down and to talk through the research. How can we do this research? How can we give children the opportunity to make their voices heard, but do it in also in a safe environment without doing any harm to children? So yes, it might seem as a challenge originally, but I think that's also one of the contributions that I want to make, is to say we need to do more research involving children, because we need to give them the opportunity to make their voices heard, and that they definitely are ways of doing it, and that we've got the support of our ethics committee with regards to that. Maybe not always easy, but I believe that if you sometimes read the quotes of children, of what they are saying in the research, it's just so powerful, because you're really giving the opportunity to make their voices heard.
Thank you so much, Carleen. Really appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on to Dr. Lizanne Wilson. Lizanne, thank you for joining us, and tell us a little bit more about your field.
Good day. Thank you for the opportunity to share, also share my research project with you. Yes, I'm also situated in the Center for Child and Youth and Family Studies, where I'm a lecturer and also a research supervisor. And yes, and if you listen at Carleen, I think my project can link very nicely to her project, is that all our children in South Africa have rights, and one of the rights in terms of the Children's Act and also in terms of our Constitution is that they must be protected. But if you open up newspapers and if you listen to the radio and TV, that's not true. Our children are being exposed to abuse, and specifically then child sexual abuse. And that's where we realized that in our country and international, is child sexual abuse a very big problem. Children are not really being protected against the abuse. So we then, after we realized that it's such a big problem, we thought of which way can we become involved in focusing on this problem. And then we decided to look at a prevention focus and see if we can focus on the prevention of child sexual abuse. So we then realized that even though children are exposed to abuse, children living in a high-risk community where there's alcohol abuse, where there's domestic violence, where there's poverty, where there's higher rates of unemployment, are even more prone to abuse. So then we decided that we want to look from a prevention side, and then identify a high-risk community, and then start with a context-specific prevention strategy that we can develop from this community. So we started with a project. I currently have 5 master's degree students in this project. The first student then is currently busy with the data collection. So what she did is that she went to a community, and we have a specific high-risk community in Northwest, that she went to the community, and then she identified all the protective and risk factors in this community, because we want to know the community before we can develop a strategy to prevent, to try to prevent child sexual abuse. So the first student then focused on the risk and protective factors, and then we had 2 students that spoke to the, or they're busy with the data collection now. They're doing focus group with caregivers of children in the primary schools in this high-risk community. So they will, in the focus group, try to determine and hear the voices of the parents, to determine how do they see their role in terms of the prevention of child sexual abuse. Because we are working from a community engagement perspective, and what that means is that we don't want to put the responsibility only on the children or only on the parents. We want the whole community to get involved and make it a community project, to try to prevent the abuse of children. So these students then they are then busy with a focus group. Then I have a third student that's busy that's doing a rapid review, and she is looking at all the current prevention programs that there is to see. We want to develop a program, but what is currently out there, and she's doing now the rapid review on that. And then I have the fifth student in the project. She's going to the children. And as Carleen also said, we want to hear the voices of the children. This project is to protect children, but we also want to hear how do they see them being protected in a community, specifically a high-risk community. How do they see safety? How do they plot the community? We're going to use a community map activity with them that they can identify the risk in the community, and also do they feel safe or unsafe in the community, and what can the community do to protect these children. So after these 5 students, we need 2 more students for 2022 to assist us with the development of the strategy, and also to implement the strategy and test the strategy and see if we can, at the end of, say, 3-year cycles or even more 5-year cycles, have an intervention strategy that can focus on the prevention of child sexual abuse. Thank you so much.
All right, Lizanne, incredible. The focus on the community brings in itself a strategic value to the work that you do. I mean, one of the first 2 steps of strategic planning is, of course, environmental analysis and stakeholder analysis and so on. And it seems to me as if there's a strong focus on that because you focus so strongly in the community. But I was wondering, in terms of collaboration of these stakeholders in the community, because I assume that you are very dependent on these role players availing themselves and contributing. Do you experience challenges in getting the different stakeholders and role players to engage with you when it comes to research?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think our first stakeholder that we got involved was the tribal council, the tribal office, and the chief, of course. So he gave us the blessings for the study, and he also is still giving his full cooperation. And then also the Department of Education, and then also Department of Social Development. So all of these departments and stakeholders are very excited, and they bought into the project. I think the challenge is that I'm in Wellington, but fortunately, all my students are in Northwest, and they're all qualified social workers. So they are wonderful in doing most of the negotiation with the stakeholders. On a higher level, I negotiate, but in the communities, I negotiate with all these stakeholders. So yes, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, Lizanne, thank you so much. You know, of late we've seen so many different forms of study supervision and how people connect with one another. It's fascinating to know that you're in Wellington, your students all over the country, and then specifically in the Northwest, and that close supervisory relationship is still there, and that you can still aid and provide guidance. Thank you so much, Lizanne.
Thank you.
We are now going to move on to Dr. Isi Jacobs. Isi, thank you so much also for being here. Let's hear it. What are you focusing on?
Yes, thank you so much. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Isi Jacobs, and I'm a senior lecturer also at the Center for Child, Youth and Family Studies here in Wellington, which is an off-campus office of the Noordwes-Universiteit. My research focus is the relational well-being of families, with a specific focus on the relational well-being between parents and adolescents. One author, which really meant a lot to me while I was busy with my own studies, said the following about the importance to have relationships. He wrote and said, without mutually stimulating interactions, people and neurons wither and die. In neurons, this process is called apoptosis, and in humans, it's called depression, grief, and suicide. And with the COVID-19, it has brought a new and an unknown dynamic to the relational well-being of families in general, and specifically to the relational well-being between parents and adolescents. Students, therefore, are looking at the relational well-being of this relationship in different contexts. These include parents and adolescents who live in rural communities, parents and adolescents who live in urban and peri-urban areas, and then also parents and adolescents who live in affluent communities. The data collection methods that the students are using include interviews, focus group, and a method that I personally like a lot is called the intergenerational reflective group technique, which especially works very well when including parents and adolescents at the same time in a data collection session. Future research opportunities for students involve further studies on the relational well-being between parents and adolescents within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, the evaluation of a workshop to facilitate reciprocal responsibility in the parent-adolescent relationship. The title of my PhD study was a practice framework to facilitate reciprocal responsibility in this relationship. And then one of the outcomes of the framework is a workshop that I've developed and which I'm currently presenting at a children's home to assist with the relational well-being between the caregivers and the adolescents that are taking care of them or that's in their care. I think evidence-based research in social work has become more pertinent over the past decades, and which then necessitate the evaluation of this workshop. I also have a project that I'm planning for 2022 through to 2024, which will involve a survey to determine the relational well-being of families in South Africa. Yeah, that's all from my side. Thank you.
Issy, it's fascinating. I tell you, every time I hear about someone doing relational studies or studies relating to a relationship, I'm fascinated by all the dimensions that one can find in relationships. I mean, you've briefly mentioned reciprocity, for example, which is a fascinating concept in relationships and exchanges and so on that happens. But then you took it to the next level, intergenerational reflective group technique. That must be a fascinating process to go through. Tell us a little bit more about that, because I'm fascinated about what happens in that technique.
Yeah. Yes, as I said, I personally also like this technique, and what I did with my study specifically, I had you have the adolescents and the students, the adolescents and the parents together in one group, and in my study I had, for instance, the parents first, they will sort of form part of the inner circle, and then the adolescents will form part of an outer circle. And I would ask a question. The question to the parents, for instance, was, how is it for you to be a parent of an adolescent child? And then the parents would respond to that while the adolescents just listen to what the parents are saying. And then after a while, the adolescents get the opportunity to reflect on what they've heard the parents said. And then again, the parents would reflect back to what the adolescents have heard. And then the process would turn around where the adolescents form part of the inner circle. And I would, for instance, ask them, what should your parents do to contribute to the well-being of your relationship? And while the adolescents are giving their views, the parents aren't allowed to contribute to anything, but then afterwards they then will reflect on what the adolescents have said, and in that way you just get so much rich data. And I think it's a very important experience also for both the parents and the adolescents, and that this was also something that I got afterwards, where parents, for instance, said they've heard something from their adolescents that they've never ever heard before. Yeah, so that is really, it's a powerful technique, method to use when working with different generations at the same time in in a research project.
Thank you, Isi. Rich data, indeed, fascinating technique that you explained to us, and I'm sure that it also it just generates so much healing and some more opportunities to engage in all the relationships that you study. Thank you so much. That was Dr. Isi Jacobs. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you've heard from our experts, and it's time to get an expert view on the details of the master's program that we have on offer in social work. I'm going to ask Melanie Stradom to join me and tell us a little bit more about the master's in social work. Melanie, I'm specifically interested in the format that it takes on and the mode of delivery and duration of study and all the relevant logistics. Hello, Melanie, and thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Melanie Stradom, and I am the administrative assistant at Compress for all the research masters in social work students. The degree gives you the opportunity to conduct research at several focus areas, as you have heard, outlined as everyone have spoken just now. You'll also be, the field of research, the completion of the degree takes 2 years to complete this degree. You will be supported by a highly skilled study supervisor and receive group supervision more or less twice a year. There will also be formal classes or modules if so as indicated. Okay.
All right, thank you, Melanie. And I've heard some of the experts say that they still have positions and specific positions available for studies in 2022. So you are still accepting applications, right?
That's correct, Skipper. The cut-off date for applications is the end of the month on the 30th of September. So everyone that wants to apply, they can go onto the NWU website. They can either, they will see this section that says studies, and then there's a section they can go that says postgraduate studies. And then there's another section for higher degree admissions. And then there will be a link that they can click on. They can either apply online, or they can also download the PDF fillable form as well.
Melanie, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Melanie has explained where to go when applying, and you'll also see on that Postgraduate Studies website there's the very important link to bursaries, and that is also available at the Noordwes-Universiteit for people like you interested in our higher degrees. Professor Rita Bloem, I don't know how you cope with this every day, because we've had a glimpse into the fascinating world of social work and all the studies being done there. But you have the privilege of working with these experts every day. It must first of all be very exciting and secondly quite engaging to hear of all these experts and the studies that they engage in. And then, since we're in the postgraduate environment, also some of the work that these students do within postgraduate studies.
Yes, thank you. It is indeed the truth. I think you've heard only a few experts talking this afternoon. We've actually have a team of almost 50 researchers in this field. We also have interdisciplinary research. So social workers working with psychologists, working with transdisciplinary researchers, working with nutritionists, working with physiology. So that is actually the nice thing about a Faculty of Health Sciences. We also engage with our affiliated health sciences. And it gives us a rich environment to do research in. I think the role of social work in health sciences, and not only in health sciences, actually in the world we live in, is extremely important. And people working as social workers know that social work is all about people. And in this, it implies diversity. And I think to have answers on all problems, all diverse problems, can be really tiring. And I think that is why postgraduate studies can give you an extra skill set, equipping you to answer some of the questions. We won't be able to answer all the problems and all the questions that there is in our communities, but it can equip you to get to problem solving, or to understand the world we live in a little bit better. So I think even for practitioners with a master's degree, there's also a PhD degree, and that is our flagship degree in our entity. Actually partnering with practitioners in the field to ensure that our evidence and our evidence-based research really applies to what is happening in South Africa, or Sub-Saharan Africa especially. We also focus on indigenous knowledge systems to ensure that we're in Africa for Africa, so that we can develop our own theories to get to answers that is really applicable for our context. I think we've been working too long, too far away from what is really the voice of this continent. So I think Northwest University as such is really positioned itself to answer these questions. And in our faculty, specifically with our partners in affiliated health research. So I want to invite people to make contact with us and to express your interest. We've only had time to discuss a few possibilities. There's also other possibilities that you can perhaps find a home for postgraduate studies. And yes, you've mentioned the bursary schemes. I know sometimes finances can be quite a huge burden for postgraduate students, especially social workers. But I think the Northwest University has proven record of well-established financial support to our postgraduate students, with faculty bursaries, with postgraduate bursaries, even external sponsors in bursary schemes. So from my side, I think I'm so enthusiastic about the world of social work and where we're aiming at. I think it's time that we, in social work in South Africa or in this continent, start to prepare ourselves for the next generation of problem solvers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was Professor Rita Bloem, Director of Compress. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to know more about this research entity, then go to the Northwest University's website and you'll find them in the Faculty of Health Sciences. Just look for Compress under the drop-down menu that you'll find under Research. There you can see all about the work that they do and the experts available. Contact them if you'd like to explore some of these topics, and if you want to know more, they are available and they will gladly converse with you. Thank you so much for your time. If you want more information, you'll find it at www.nwu.ac.za.